There are translations you do with your tongue and translations you do with your life. For 30 years, I did both. I was the word between my mother and the world, between her and the physician who spoke too fast, between her and the insurance form that used 8 syllables where 2 would do, between her and the pharmacist who could not understand why she was shaking her head no at a dosage he considered standard. I was fluent in 2 languages, and in a third one no language school teaches. The language of smoothing over, of filling in, of making the moment work so that no one had to feel the friction of the gap. I was 53 years old when I stopped. I did not announce it. I did not write a letter. I did not have a conversation in which I explained my reasoning in careful, graduated terms. I sent one text message. Then I sat in my office at the Department of Public Health, second desk from the window, the one with the spider plan I had been keeping alive since 2009, and I went back to work. My name is Priya Venkataramaya, and I have been translating for my mother since I was 23 years old. My mother came to the United States from Tamil Nadu in 1978. She learned enough English to run a household, to buy groceries, to speak to teachers, to argue with the landlord about the furnace. But medical English is its own dialect, dense with Latin and hedged with liability, and she never learned it. When I was the only one of her 3 children still living in the same city, it became my job. That is how these things work, I have come to understand. The job does not get assigned. It accretes. One appointment becomes 2, becomes a standing arrangement, becomes a decade, becomes a second decade, becomes 30 years, and at some point it is simply part of who you are. I was Priya, who translated. I was there for the hypertension diagnosis in 2003 and the hip replacement consultation in 2011 and the 16-appointment cardiology series in 2017 when my mother had the arrhythmia that turned out to be manageable but required a specialist she did not like and a medication she pronounced wrong on purpose. I was there for all of it. I kept a leather appointment book, dark brown, slightly scuffed at the corners, in which I recorded every appointment. The practice had started practically. I needed to clear the time on my work calendar and request the flex hours from my supervisor. But over the years, the book had accumulated a kind of archaeology. Her appointments were written in blue ink. Mine were in black. Looking at any given month, you could measure the ratio. Blue to black, her life to mine. I was not resentful.
I want to be precise about that.
I loved my mother. I love her now. The resentment came later. Or rather, the naming of it came later because the feeling had been there for years without a word attached. What I want to explain is the mechanism. When you are the person who closes the gap becomes invisible. My mother did not experience herself as someone who needed help at appointments. She experienced herself as someone whose daughter came with her. The help was structurally erased by my presence. The moment I walked through the door, the need dissolved, and what remained was just the 2 of us, together at the doctor, which is a thing mothers and daughters do. Normal. Unremarkable. I had a supervisor at work named Dorothea Achebe, a compact woman in her 60s who wore exactly 3 colors, navy, gray, and a deep green she called pine, and she had noticed over the years that I took more midday flex hours than most of the team. She never asked. But in the autumn of the year all of this happened, she stopped me in the hallway near the copier and said, not unkindly, "You look like someone who has been running 2 calendars for a long time." I said, 3. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "That's too many," and went back to her office. I thought about that for a long time. There is a particular exhaustion that comes not from the effort of a task, but from the invisibility of it. Not from doing. From never being seen doing. My mother's name is Kamala. She is 79 years old. She is sharp, funny, deeply stubborn, and in possession of an opinion about every decision I have ever made. She emigrated with $40 and 2 suitcases and built a life entirely through will and proximity, staying close to people who could help her, forming bonds of loyalty that ran in one direction and then, when she was established, in the other. She understood networks the way some people understand music, intuitively, without formal training, as an expression of something natural. What she had never fully understood, or perhaps never needed to understand, was the cost of those networks to the people inside them. I understand now that this was inherited. Her own mother had done the same to her in a different way, in a different country, with different tasks. The demand that the capable child sacrifice for the whole was not cruelty. It was the water she had swum in so long, she did not know it was wet. She passed it to me the same way, not as instruction but as atmosphere. That does not make it weightless, but it makes it something other than malice. The appointment was a routine cardiology follow-up at the Harrington Medical Center, 3rd floor, Suite 311, which I had been to so many times that I knew the name of the receptionist's dog, and which elevator was fastest. I had taken a half day of flex time. I had rearranged 2 meetings. I had driven 40 minutes in November traffic. The cardiologist was a young physician named Dr. Castellano, whom my mother did not trust because he was younger than her youngest child, but whose clinical record was excellent and whose explanations were, when I was not in the room, apparently incomprehensible. I had been translating his careful, Latinate explanations into plain Tamil and then back into plain English for the follow-up questions for 2 years. That afternoon, while Dr. Castellano was writing a note in the chart and my mother was pulling her cardigan back onto her shoulders, she looked at him and said something in Tamil I did not immediately translate. He looked up. "I'm sorry." She smiled at him pleasantly and repeated it in English, unprompted, which was not usual. She said, "My daughter, she is no life. She is always free. That is why she comes." She said it lightly, conversationally, the way you say something you believe to be self-evidently true and assume the room shares. Dr. Castellano said, "That's very kind of her," and went back to the chart. My mother adjusted her cardigan. I said nothing. I drove her home. I walked her to the door. I waited until I heard the deadbolt turn from the inside. Then I sat in my car in her driveway for 11 minutes. I know the exact duration because I was watching the clock on my dashboard without meaning to, the way you watch something you cannot look away from. She has no life. She is always free. It was not the worst thing she had ever said about me. That distinction belonged to a different day, years earlier, which I have no intention of describing here. What made this particular sentence different, what made it the one that finally broke the surface, was that she said it to someone else. In front of me. In my presence, as a fact about me, offered to a stranger, without checking whether I agreed. I had been translating for her for 30 years. I had sat in every room and rendered her world legible. And in that room, in front of that doctor, I was background. I was infrastructure. I was the thing that was always there, like the chair. I drove home. I made tea in the copper kettle I had bought at an estate sale the previous spring, a wide-bottomed thing, slightly dented, that whistled in 2 tones, and I sat at my kitchen table with the leather appointment book open in front of me. Her next appointment was in 3 weeks. Nephrology. A new specialist I had not yet met. I looked at the date in blue ink. Then I looked at my own calendar, which had 2 grants due that month for the tuberculosis prevention program I had been managing for 4 years, and a site visit from the State Health Commissioner's office on the 2nd Thursday, and a presentation to the department head I had been preparing for 6 weeks. I am 53 years old. I have a master's degree in public health. I have been employed in one form or another since I was 16. I have managed epidemiological response campaigns for 3 consecutive administrations of the City Health Department. I have no life. I am always free. I closed the appointment book. 3 weeks is not a long time. It is long enough. I did not call my mother during those 3 weeks to discuss what had happened. That was a choice, not an omission. I had learned over the years that conversations with my mother about things she had said worked according to a predictable logic. She did not remember saying them, or she remembered but not in that way, or she remembered exactly but felt that the context had been misread, or she remembered and felt it was accurate. And what was the problem? Each of these pathways led, without exception, to me explaining myself, and then to her feeling that she was being attacked, and then to my sister Leela calling me to ask what I had done to upset Alma. I had stopped running that loop 3 years earlier. I had not stopped going to the appointments. I had simply stopped expecting the conversation to resolve anything. What I did, in those 3 weeks, was work. I finished the first grant report on a Tuesday, sent it at 11:52 p.m., and felt the specific satisfaction of a task completed that would actually matter to someone. The 47 community health workers who would keep their funding for another cycle, the patients in 3 zip codes who would keep access to the mobile screening units. My colleague at the health department, a man named Raj Subramaniam, who had started 2 years before me and whom I had eaten lunch with on Tuesdays for longer than I could accurately recall, said when I forwarded him the submission confirmation, "You know you're the only person in this building who completes things before the deadline rather than after it." I said, "Someone has to." He said, "That is exactly what I mean." I ate my sandwich. I thought about that for a while. On the second Thursday, I led the commissioner's site visit. I had prepared a 40-slide presentation and spoken for 22 minutes, without notes. At the end, the deputy commissioner, a woman named Janet Holt who had a reputation for asking questions no one was prepared for, asked me why the TB case rate in the Southwest Quadrant had decreased faster than the model predicted. I gave her the answer. It was a good answer. It was, I knew, an answer that would circulate, that would be cited in the quarterly report, that would travel up the chain of attribution until it became policy rather than someone's explanation in a conference room. I drove home from that meeting and made tea and sat at the kitchen table and thought, this is also my life. This has always also been my life. And no one, not once in 30 years, had ever driven 40 minutes to sit in the room and translate for me. The appointment was on a Friday. November 14th, blue ink. Nephrology, Dr. Nakamura, 10:15 a.m. The Thursday before, at 7:43 p.m., I sent my mother a text message. I wrote, "Amma, I won't be able to make it tomorrow. The clinic has a medical interpreter service on their language line. Tamil is listed." I called ahead and confirmed it. "Here is the number. You just need to ask for it at the front desk." I put my phone face down on the kitchen table. I did not sleep easily.
I want to be honest about that.
I lay in bed that night with a copper kettle still faintly audible as it cooled on the stove, ticking as the metal contracted, and I thought about the logistics. I thought about whether Tamil was truly available, which it was. I had called and confirmed with a real person, not an automated system. I thought about whether my mother knew how to ask for it, which she did. She had navigated enough bureaucracies to know how to ask for something she needed. I thought about Dr. Nakamura, whom I had never met, and whether he would be patient, and whether the appointment would run long, and whether my mother would be frightened in a clinical way she wasn't used to. I thought about all of this, and then I thought, and what about me? Who asks those questions for me? I fell asleep around 1:15 a.m. At 9:48 the next morning, 14 minutes before my mother's appointment was scheduled to begin, my phone began ringing on my desk at work. I was in the middle of drafting a response to the county health board, and I watched the screen light up with her name, and I felt something shift in my chest, not quite fear, not quite guilt, but something between the two that lives in the body without a precise address. The kind of feeling that has been conditioned over decades to mean, you are needed, and if you don't go you will have failed. I set the pen down. I looked at the phone. I thought about every appointment. I thought about the 2017 cardiology series. I thought about the afternoon she looked at Dr. Castellano and said, "She has no life," as if I was not present. I thought about Dorothea in the hallway saying 3 is too many. I thought about picking up and saying I'm on my way. I thought about how easy that would be, how practiced, how seamlessly it would slot back into the groove of 30 years. I let the call go to voicemail. The phone rang again at 9:51. Voicemail. Again at 9:53. Voicemail. I put the phone in my desk drawer and closed it and sat with my hands flat on the desk for perhaps 30 seconds. Then I took it back out, turned it over, and went back to the county health board letter. My hands were not entirely steady. I am 53 years old, and I am not ashamed to say that my hands were not steady. But I did not pick up. By 11 a.m., she had called 28 times. I know the exact number because I counted them at noon when I finally listened to the voicemails, which I did in order, oldest first, in the small break room down the hall from my office with the door closed. The first voicemail was practical. She was at the front desk. She couldn't hear the interpreter clearly. Could I call? The third was more urgent. The 8th was distressed. By the 14th, she had moved past me and begun calling Leela, which I could infer from the changed register of the 15th message, which was calmer, which meant Leela had intervened and the appointment had been managed. The 28th was 3 words. Just my name, twice, and then silence. I sat in the break room with my phone in my lap and listened to 28 voicemails and felt the full weight of 30 years in a way I had not let myself feel before. Not the weight of burden, though it was also that, but the weight of what it had cost to be reliable. The self I had put on hold. The meetings I had left early. The grants I had submitted at midnight because the afternoon had been taken. The specific arithmetic of invisibility. Dorothea opened the break room door, saw me, and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Do you need anything?" I said, "No, thank you." She nodded and left. That was the right thing. I have always appreciated people who know when a question is a gesture rather than a request. I called Leela at 12:47 p.m. Leela is my younger sister by 5 years. She lives 20 minutes from our mother and has, over the years, contributed to my mother's care in the ways that were visible: the Sunday dinners, the birthday arrangements, the flowers when our mother was unwell, and less often in the ways that were invisible. We have never had a direct conversation about this. We have had many indirect ones. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Where were you?" Alma was alone. I said, "She wasn't alone. She had an interpreter." "That is not the same thing, and you know it." "Leela," I said, "I've been going to her appointments for 30 years. I need you to hear that number. 30 years. This was one appointment." A pause. "She was upset," Leela said. "I know she was. She cried on the phone with me." "I know that too." "Priya. She's 79. "I know how old she is," I said. "I was there when she turned 70. And 65. And 60. I was there for the party she said she didn't want, and then cried when there weren't enough flowers. I have been there for a very long time." Silence. Leela said, "What are you saying?" I said, "I'm saying she has an interpreter service available. I'm saying I'm not going to every appointment anymore. I'm saying she will be fine." Leela said, I don't understand why you're doing this now." "I've been doing it since I was 23, I said. "I'm 53 now. That's 30 years. I think that's long enough to be allowed to stop." Another silence. She said, Leela started, and then stopped. "I know what she said," I said. "I was there." Leela didn't have an answer for that. My sister appeared at my office door at 2:14 p.m. on that same Friday. I had not expected her to come in person. It is a 40-minute drive and a $40 parking fee, and Leela has never been someone who wastes either money or transit without cause. When I looked up from my monitor and saw her standing in the doorway in her gray wool coat with her bag over one arm and an expression I can only describe as determined distress, I understood that something had shifted. She said, "Can I come in?" I said, "Of course." She sat in the chair across from my desk, the one I use for one-on-ones with the junior staff, slightly uncomfortable, slightly too low, and she put her bag on her lap and held it with both hands. She said, "I need to understand what happened today." I said, "What did she tell you?" She said you abandoned her at the doctor. I let that word sit in the room for a moment. Abandoned. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out the leather appointment book. I set it on the desk between us and opened it to the front page where I had been recording appointments since 2006, 2 full books before this one. I turned it so Leela could read. Blue ink. Black ink. Blue. 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 Black. Blue. 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 3 years of pages. Leela looked at it for a long moment. She said, "I didn't know you kept track." "I kept track," I said. "How many?" "At the cardiology series alone, 16 appointments in 14 months. Between 2003 and today, I have counted at least 212. Those are the ones in this book. There was a book before this one I no longer have." Leela was quiet. "At the appointment 3 weeks ago," I said, "she told Dr. Castellano that I have no life, that I am always free."
She said it as a fact.
She said it in front of me. Leela closed her eyes for a moment.
She doesn't," she started.
"I know she doesn't mean it that way," I said. "That's part of what I'm telling you. She doesn't mean it. She has never meant it. And she has said it and things like it for 30 years, and I have translated for her every time, and she has never once thought to ask what it cost me." The room was quiet. Down the hallway, someone was running copies. The faint mechanical rhythm of it, paper through rollers, a brief pause, paper again, was the only sound. I said, I love her. I want to be clear about that. Leela nodded. I am also not going to every appointment anymore. Leela looked at the appointment book again. Then she looked up at me. She said, I should have been going. I did not say yes. I did not say it's okay. I said, there's time now. That was the right thing to say. I know that because I felt, in the moment after I said it, something unclench in the middle of my chest that had been clenched for so long I had stopped noticing it. There's time now. Not. I forgive you. Not. It doesn't matter. Not. We're fine. Just, there is time and the arrangement is changing and we can begin from here. Leela took our mother to the follow-up appointment 3 weeks later. I know this because she texted me at 9:54 a.m. that morning. At the clinic, Dr. Nakamura is explaining things slowly. The interpreter is on a phone in the room. It's fine. And then 40 minutes later, we got lunch after. She ordered the wrong thing and blamed the menu, but she was okay. I read those texts at my desk and felt something I had not expected. Not relief, exactly. Something quieter. The specific piece of watching a system function without you. I had been in every room for 30 years. I had thought, without fully thinking it, that if I left the room, something would break. That the gap I filled was not just practical, but structural. That the whole arrangement would collapse. It did not collapse. It rearranged. This is a thing they do not tell you about making yourself indispensable. They do not tell you that indispensable means the system will never develop alternatives, not that alternatives do not exist. They had always existed. They had simply never been needed. My mother called me on a Sunday 9 days after the Leela appointment. Not 28 times.
Once.
She let it ring until I picked up. She said, your sister tells me you are very busy. I said, I am. I have 2 grants due in December. She said, you always had grants due. Yes, I said. I have always been busy. A pause. My mother is not a woman who pauses easily. Silence, for her, is something to be filled, and the fact that she left this one open told me she was measuring something. Then she said in Tamil, not in English, not in the translated for others register, but in the private register, the one she reserved for things she meant, she said something that translates roughly as, you have a full life.
Not, I'm sorry.
Not, I was wrong. Not even, I see you. Just, you have a full life. In 30 years of translation, I have learned to hear what lives underneath the sentence rather than the sentence itself. What she was saying underneath it was that she had not known, that she had seen what she was given to see, a daughter who is always available, and she had not looked for what lay beneath it. She was saying this not as an excuse, but as a fact, the way she states most things, and what she was also saying in the gap beneath the fact was that she had seen it now. I said in Tamil, I know, Amma. That was enough. Not everything, but enough. The question of the appointments did not resolve in a single conversation. These things never do. What happened, over the following months, was more gradual and more durable. Leela started going to the routine follow-ups. For the complex appointments, the cardiology specialist, the occasional new diagnosis that required careful technical explanation, I was still there. But it was a choice, made each time, rather than a default. The difference between those two things is not visible from the outside. From the inside, it is the difference between oxygen and drowning. In January, I met my mother at the cardiologist for the first time since November. I had not told her I was coming. I arrived and sat in the waiting room, and she came through the door and saw me, and her face did something complicated. Surprise layering onto relief, layering onto something I recognized as pride, though she would never have called it that. She sat down next to me and straightened her sari and said, you came. I said, I came. She did not say, I'm glad you're here. She said, the parking garage on the east side is $3 cheaper. I said, I'll remember that. We went in together. Dr. Castellano, who is, I should note, a genuinely excellent physician despite being younger than my youngest nephew, explained the updated medication schedule with his usual methodical precision. I translated. My mother asked questions. The appointment took 31 minutes. Afterward, we went to the tea shop on the corner of 5th and Harrington, a place she had liked for 20 years that served a chai she considered almost acceptable.
She ordered it.
I ordered the same. We sat across from each other at a small table near the window. She said, "Your sister called the interpreter herself last time. She didn't need to ask you." "I know," I said. "She managed." "She did." My mother looked out the window. Then she looked back at me. She said, "You could have said something before." I thought about that for a moment. The 30 years of appointments, the leather book, the blue ink. I said, "I didn't think you'd hear it." She was quiet. "Do you hear it now?" I asked. She wrapped both hands around her cup. She said, "I hear it now. That is not absolution."
I want to be clear about that.
It is not the ending where everything is resolved and the wound is healed and the relationship is repaired in one conversation over mediocre chai. It is something smaller and more real, a woman of 79 who has never found it easy to say she was wrong, finding a sideways way to say she sees. I drove home. I parked in my usual spot. I sat for a moment in the car, not watching the clock. I was not needed anywhere. The feeling was strange. Not quite peace, not quite emptiness, something in between. The space left behind when something you have been carrying for 30 years is put down.
Not gone,
Not forgotten.
but set down.
I went upstairs. I made tea in the copper kettle. I opened the leather appointment book and wrote nothing in it, because there was nothing to write, and the blank page looked, for the first time in a long time, like possibility rather than absence. 30 years. 212 appointments at minimum. 3 books of blue ink. Thousands of words carried from one language into another, from uncertainty into clarity, from fear into something that could be understood. All of it delivered by a woman who had a master's degree and a spider plant and 2 grants due in December, who was, according to her mother, always free. Here is what I know now on the other side of it. The labor that is never named does not stop existing. It accumulates in the body. It is stored in the place just below the sternum where old obligations live. When someone tells you that you have no life, they are not describing your life. They are describing the portion of your life they have been permitted to see. Do not confuse the window for the room. The people who love us most can be the last to notice what they are taking. Not because they are selfish. Because our competence erases the evidence of cost. We are so good at the filling in that the gap appears to have never existed. You are allowed to stop being the interpreter. For anyone, in any room, the thing you have been doing every time, automatically because it was once needed and became habit and became identity, that thing is a choice. It was always a choice. You just forgot, somewhere in the middle of 30 years, that you were the one making it. What you name, you can change. What you leave unnamed continues. The morning after Leela's first appointment without me, I opened the leather book and counted the blue entries. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I opened the window and made tea and put the book on the shelf and did not close it and did not keep it out, just left it there, visible, evidence of a life I had been living without being seen living it. I am 53 years old, and I am still learning that my time has the same value as anyone else's. Still learning it, still practicing. The lesson is not one you arrive at once. It visits. You let it in. It leaves something behind each time. If you have been the word between someone else and the world, the translator, the fixer, the one who makes the moment work, and you have done it so long that the role has become invisible even to you, I want you to sit with one question before you close this. Who translates for you?